All right, so we'll pick up here with part two, and we're going to talk about the microscopic structure of our skeletal muscle. And so we talked about how sometimes skeletal muscle cells are also called muscle fibers, and we'll take a closer look at this fibrous appearance of our muscle, and then some things that we find within the fiber itself, so within the cell itself. Our fibers can range from very, very small, so 4/100ths of an inch, to 12 inches. Our longest muscle in our body is within our anterior thigh compartment, and so where you commonly think of where your quads are, and that muscle is called the sartorius muscle. It's very long, very thin and elongated muscle, but the average length of a muscle cell is about an inch or so. Um, Within our skeletal muscle cell, we have things called myofibrils, and within this myofibril, we have something called myofilaments. And so we'll take a look at these. We have different types of myofilaments. We have thick ones and we have thin ones. And we'll take a closer look at these, and this is what will actually produce the large-scale movement and contraction that we're so used to seeing and talking about. So here you can see an entire fiber. This large structure here is the whole fiber. One of these individual inner structures here, this is a myofibril, okay, so muscle fiber, myofibril, and then within these you can see these little red and blue lines. These are striations that give our muscle this striated appearance, and these are specifically the myofilaments. So we'll talk about what the red ones are called, and we'll talk about what these blue ones are called as we progress. So whenever we take a look within our muscle cell, just as with any other somatic cell, it's going to have a plasma membrane surrounding it. And within our muscle cell, we're going to call this the sarcolemma. And we'll see this term sarco come up quite often. And anytime you hear the word sarco, you're going to start to associate it with muscles, okay? And we'll talk about why that is. Within our sarcoplasm, we have things like myoglobin, which is important for binding oxygen in muscle cells, mitochondria, myofibrils, and like I said, we'll get into these a little bit more. We also have something called a sarcoplasmic reticulum. Now, again, sarco, we're referring to our muscles, and you may think that this structure, this term sounds very close to endoplasmic reticulum, and you wouldn't be incorrect. A sarcoplasmic reticulum is a type of smooth endoplasmic reticulum that we find in muscle cells, and it will contain calcium ions, okay? And this will become very, very important as we continue talking about our skeletal muscle and how it contracts. We'll see that we need calcium, and we're going to get this intracellular calcium from our sarcoplasmic reticulum. Sometimes you'll also see it abbreviated SR for sarcoplasmic reticulum. So when we have our plasma membrane that we discussed, we call our plasma membrane our sarcolemma, right? There are areas where our sarcolemma kind of invaginates and kind of travels downward further into our muscle fibers, perpendicular to it. And these are called T-tubules or transverse tubules. And these will become very important when we discuss the action potential and how you get the action potential from the neuron, from the motor neuron stimulating our muscle cell, down into the interior of the muscle cell itself for our contraction to actually take place. And it will travel down this T-tubule. Now, we have our T-tubule that you can see here, this kind of lighter whitish color. And then just on either side of it, you see two structures that are yellow in appearance. These are two parts of our sarcoplasmic reticulum called the terminal cisternae. Okay, so you have one on this side and you have one on this side. And so that makes a group of three structures, and this is called a muscle triad. Okay, so one terminal cisternae, another terminal cisternae of the sarcoplasmic reticulum, and then you have your transverse tubule here. And again, what did our sarcoplasmic reticulum contain? It contained our calcium ions. Okay, so we'll see calcium within this. What does the T-tubule do? It allows the action potential to travel from the sarcolemma down into the muscle cell, and we'll see that once that action potential travels down our T-tubule, it will stimulate the release of calcium from these terminal cisternae. So it makes sense that these two things are very, very close and adjacent to each other. So here's just another picture of our muscle triad, more from a cross section. So you can see the sarcolemma here as it goes across, and then there are various areas where it will invaginate, come down, and go back up. And on either side, you have the parts of the sarcoplasmic reticulum, the terminal cisternae, and those three structures together make up our muscle triad. So let's answer some questions real quick. So what are the layers surrounding a muscle from superficial to deep? Well, we know we have the epimysium surrounding the entire muscle. We have a perimysium surrounding a group of muscle fibers or a fascicle. And then we have the endomysium surrounding an individual muscle cell. Now, this endomysium is different from the sarcolemma, from the plasma membrane. It is superficial to the sarcolemma. Okay, so they're not the same thing. What are our three types of muscle? Well, we know we have skeletal, cardiac, and smooth. Skeletal is voluntary, cardiac is involuntary, and smooth is involuntary. Where is calcium stored in our muscle cells? Well, it is stored in the sarcoplasmic reticulum. And then what comprises a triad in a muscle cell? So our muscle triad in our skeletal muscle is composed of one terminal cisternae of the sarcoplasmic reticulum, another terminal cisternae, and the T-tubule, which is that invagination of our sarcolemma. Okay? So we will stop here for part 2, and we'll pick up with part 3 in the next video.